So our next speaker is Cassie Mellon from the West Desert District in Utah, and she'll be talking about using multiple lines of evidence to inform grazing management, more from an aquatic perspective, I believe.
Yes, I think all the terrestrial folks just left the room. So thanks. Like Sarah said, I'm from the Salt Lake Field Office, and I want to start out by thanking some of the other folks who have helped out with this. Scott Miller from the NOC, Robin Jones from the National Aquatic Monitoring Center, and Justin Jimenez, who's our state fisheries and riparian lead, as well as the other folks in the Salt Lake Field Office and the managers who've kind of helped out and been supportive of this process. So just to orient you a little bit to where we are in the world, the Salt Lake Field Office covers about 3 million acres in northern Utah. And the area we're going to be talking about specifically is here in Rich County in the northeast corner of the field office. And if any of you can remember back to Monday morning in the plenary session, Kathleen Clark actually gave a really great overview of this project. We call it the Three Creeks Project. And what it is, it's currently 10 grazing allotments. 5 of those are managed by the BLM, 5 by the Forest Service. And there's a mix of BLM, Forest Service, private, and then state land ownership in the area. In general, right now, it's managed under a season-long grazing management. And like Kathleen Clark mentioned, we received a proposal from the State Grazing Improvement Program and from the permittees to change management in this area to basically make this one giant allotment with a lot of pastures and switch to more of a high-intensity, short-duration, rotational grazing management system. And they had a great example of where this had been very successful in improving conditions, improving the range for them, as well as improving the land on deseret land and livestock, which is an area just to the south of here. In addition to the ranching that occurs in this area, there's also a couple of really important sensitive species. There's Bonneville cutthroat trout, which are a state of Utah sensitive species, as well as its greater sage grouse priority habitat. So just to give you a few examples of what we're looking at, in some of the higher elevations, riparian areas are dominated by willow. Some of the lower elevations, more of a sedge and forb riparian, low gradient streams, uplands dominated by sagebrush. And then we do have a few grazing exposures that are throughout the project area, and those I'll be talking about a little bit more because we do have a few data points and plots that are paired with a plot inside the exposure and then another plot either upstream or downstream just outside of the exposure. So we've heard a little bit about rangeland health standards already. There's 4 of those in Utah, 1 focusing on the uplands, 1 on the riparian species, and then the water quality standards. And so then when we make a change in our management, we need to conduct a rangeland health assessment to determine if we're meeting these standards. If we're not meeting our standards, determine if grazing is one of the primary factors in that. And then if we're not meeting the standards, we need to make a management change. So the one I'm going to be focusing on today is just that riparian and wetland standard, and that we need to be managing those areas to be in proper functioning condition. And I have that highlighted because there's a proper functioning condition state, and then there's also the proper functioning condition methodology and assessment process that is typically the main thing that we've used to make that decision. And so what I'm going to be talking about is how we can use some of the quantitative data from AIM and from some other monitoring sources to inform that decision of if we're in proper functioning conditions. So we actually have a lot of aquatic data that's been collected in this area over the last 10 years. In 2007 and 2008, there was a pretty comprehensive PFC assessment that was done, so on all of the stream miles and on all of the wetland and spring areas in the project area. We had MIM plots that were established then following that. In 2009, we had 8 MIM plots that were established. 6 of those are the paired ones where one point is inside of an exposure and one point is outside. Those have been sampled either once, twice, or 3 times, just kind of depending. And then in 2016, we started doing Aquatic AIM in the field office. And so that was the start of what is a 2-year sampling design. And like Scott and others have talked about, we have our randomly located plots. And so 4 of those from our whole field office design fell in the Three Creeks area. And then we added 4 additional sites that we placed right on top of 4 of the MIM sites that were already established. And at those 4 sites, we did both protocols in 2016. We did both the AIM and the MIM protocol. And just to show you where those are, sorry if those don't show up very well, the yellow triangles are the MIM sites, and so that's one of the paired ones, and then these 2 down here that are circled are the paired ones. The blue dots are the AIM sites, and those ones are the ones that just were the randomly located sites, and then these that are circled are the MIM points where we also did AIM. So like others have talked about, there's a lot of data that's collected with AIM, and then a lot of indicators that can be computed from that data. So for what I'm going to be talking about and kind of what we wanted, some of the things that we really focused on were some of the indicators that were most likely to be affected by livestock grazing and those that were most important to some of the sensitive species in the area. So Bonneville cutthroat trout don't like fine sediment. And then, so that was one of the indicators that we wanted to focus on. And then some other indicators that are related to that, such as the bank stability and cover. And then we also wanted to include overhead cover, which is kind of a indicator of the amount of shade that is reaching the stream, so it helps keep cool water temperature. So just to give you a few examples of what some of the streams look like in the area and some of the things we monitored. So you can see we have some very well covered banks, we have some uncovered banks, some bank stability where we'd have some stable banks here and probably some unstable ones. You can see there's not a whole lot of shade that would be reaching the stream. And you can kind of tell that there's a little bit of some fine sediment that you can see in that picture. So those are some of the things that we're going to be monitoring. Just another example, I think this is inside one of the exclosures. So you've got, you know, our lone willow providing some shade. And then this is one of the other streams. This is actually one of the fishless streams in the project area. So to give you an idea of what we're looking at. So once we've collected this data, we need to be able to determine what it means. You know, is this 57 good or bad, or, you know, where are we? So we had benchmarks that we used that had been established by ecoregion where these sites occurred, where there was a lot of reference data that was compiled in a range of conditions that was determined to be kind of in good or reference condition, and then looked at level of departure from that. For better or worse, there are actually 2 ecoregions that cut across this area that had some pretty different standards for things like fine sediment. And what we elected to do, rather than just, you know, strictly staying within the ecoregion we were in, was, since fine sediment is so important for Bonneville cutthroat trout, we kind of decided to be a little more strict on ourselves in that one and use a higher standard for our cutthroat streams than our non-cutthroat streams. And so we went through a similar process with bank stability and each of the indicators that we're looking at. We had some benchmarks that we agreed upon. So you don't need to really look at all of the data in here. This is just showing each of our 8 AIM sites that we looked at. The 5 on the left with the fish are the ones that are cutthroat streams. The other 3 are the ones that aren't, so that's where we had the different standards that we used. The red are values that were kind of in the poor or more highly departed condition. The green was in the reference condition or good. And a couple of things that kind of stood out to me, at least, is that inside our exclosures, these 2 sites here are the only sites that have any indicators that we're in kind of the good reference condition. And then we have a few things like bank stability and overhead cover that for all of our sites that aren't in the exclosures were in the highly departed condition. But we're not, I mean, for our rangeland health standards, we're not really interested in, is fine sediment good, fair, or poor. We need to determine what condition these sites are in. And so what we did is we gathered an ID team from our office, and so we brought in actually all of our range staff in the office, as well as the wildlife biologist and myself, and we talked about those benchmarks that I mentioned previously, agreed upon those as a group. In addition to just the AIM data that I'm showing for those sites where we had the MIM sites where we had repeat visits, we looked at the trends that we're showing in that data. MIM also has some additional grazing specific indicators that are collected, such as stubble height and bank alterations. So those were really useful to include at those sites. And then we also, since we had, some of the initial PFC stuff that was done in 2008, we had photo assessments from that we're able to do a photo comparison. So we incorporated all of that information, just an example of our kind of trend sites, incorporated all of that information to make our determinations of what condition each of those sites were in. So what we decided as a group is that our 2 sites that were within exclosures were in proper functioning condition. And then of the 6 sites outside of exclosures, we had 3 of them that we said were not functioning and 3 of them that we said were functioning at risk. And this definitely was a little bit more than just counting up the boxes that were red and white and green. You can see this site on Randolph Creek, we said is not functioning, but it has a couple of things that are in fair condition, whereas this other site on Randolph Creek, all of those boxes are red, but we said it was functioning at risk. So some reasons for that is that the one site we had the MIM data, so we had repeat visits, we had a trend at that site. And then another kind of thing that stood out is the 3 sites that we have as not functioning, they all have bank stability levels that are less than 20%, whereas the ones that we said were functioning at risk have bank stability levels more around 40 or 50%. So even though those are all kind of in the red category, that was kind of a split for us as well. So just to summarize that, again, like I said, sites within exclosures, we said were in proper functioning condition. The ones outside were split. We then scaled that to all of the stream miles that were in those allotments. So we scaled that so that all of our stream miles within exclosures we said were properly functioning, and those outside exclosures we said were a split between those other 2 categories. And from that, we did determine that we were not meeting our riparian health standard, and that grazing was a primary factor for that. Some additional things that we did with this data and assessment is that we did use kind of the same process in our greater sage-grouse habitat assessment, where we need to be managing for sage-grouse habitat for the riparian areas to be in proper functioning condition. It was the same process, except instead of scaling to the allotment, it was scaled to that sage-grouse habitat layer. And we now have an additional year of data, some additional sites that were collected in 2017, which we weren't able to use in this assessment, but that we were able to collect prior to any management change occurring. And so we now have this really great baseline with which we'll be able to monitor any trends that occur. So some of the challenges with this, like I just mentioned, it was just 1 year. We would have liked to have had more points. We have those now, but we had to make that assessment with the data we had. This was the first time that we had done this in our field office, and it seems like a few others are doing this kind of at the same time, but we didn't really have any examples. And so, we had really great support and buy-in from management and from those in our field office, so that was really, really critical. Where we did both our AIM and our MIM methods at the same site, we found that those both methods provided really similar results. And also some of those grazing specific indicators that are collected with MIM are really important additions to AIM, a really good supplemental indicator for AIM, that if we think we're going to be using some of the AIM data to inform rangeland health assessments or grazing management decisions, those are probably really important indicators to add. That was really helpful to have that. Another kind of challenge for us is that this is a high-profile area and a high-profile project for us. And so while it does feel a little bit risky to be kind of doing this, like we haven't done this before, we think having this quantifiable data and having this AIM data and this process is really going to be critical in moving forward to help justify the decisions that we're making and how we've made those decisions. So with that, thank you for your time. I don't know how to do a talk without fish pictures, so take any questions.
I mean, I've heard good things about the Three Creeks committees, even. How much were they involved in the process at all as part of the discussion on setting benchmarks and things like that?
So just the aquatics process, I guess they weren't really involved in the determining the rangeland health assessment. We have a lot of meetings with them and a lot of discussions, so it's not, I don't think it was anything that caught them by surprise or that they were unaware of or would disagree with that condition.
I probably guessed it, but did you do the POC qualitative assessment and use the quantifiable?
So the PFC assessments were done in 2007 and 2008. We did not repeat those, no. So we kind of used that as a starting point, but we used the quantifiable data to make the final determination. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and then for the areas like some of the springs and lentic habitats where that was all we had was that 2007 to 2008 PFC. We used that there.
I didn't catch the beginning of your talk, but the weather is going to be
2016. I feel like it thunderstormed every time we sampled. I think it was a pretty average year. It wasn't, it was a pretty average year. 2017, we had a winter after that was a really good winter. And then our samples from 2017, like the streams were running high all in 2017. I think 16 was a pretty average year. for sure that, that is a factor, but it was a pretty average year.
Thank you, Cassie.